Hello and welcome to Professor Pincushion. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can create pattern pieces from tops hanging up in your closet right now. Now, if you've seen our tutorials before, you know that we have one that shows you how to create pattern pieces from simple tops. We recommend that you watch that tutorial first and then come back to watch this one, because in this one, we're going to show you how to create pattern pieces from more complex elements. Like tops that have zipper or button fasteners. We're also going to go over yokes, tucks, and darts. So let's go ahead and get started. As far as supplies are concerned, you're going to need some paper. So large sheets of paper, big enough to do your pattern pieces. I like to use the pattern paper, but it's not necessary. You're going to need some straight rulers. If you have curve rulers like the French curve, that could also come in handy for when you're doing armholes. I have a sewing gauge here, so it's just a ruler on a smaller scale. You'll see my tracing wheel is up there. Now you don't need a tracing wheel, it just makes it a lot easier. You can also just do it the old-fashioned way with using straight pins. A pencil with an eraser is also helpful. Some paper scissors, some tape. I have a large piece of cardboard that I'm going to put underneath my paper. So that way when I lay my paper down and my shirt down, I can use straight pins to punch through it and hold everything into place. Lastly, you're going to need the top that you want to replicate. The difference from doing a simple top to something a little bit more complicated is the number of pieces that you're going to have to create for your pattern. So with a tank top, for example, you may have the front and the back. If you have a t-shirt, maybe you're going to add sleeves to that. So that's 3 pieces that you're going to have to make pattern pieces for. If you move to something like this, we're going to have the collar, the sleeve, the cuff. This front piece alone has like 4 pieces because it has this tuck piece and then this side piece, and then if I move this down, I have the separate piece here and the buttons, so it can be overwhelming. So what I suggest to do, if you're doing something that is definitely more complex, before you've even started making any of your pattern pieces, you look over the top and you break down all the different elements. So you can write down, you need to do a collar, you need to do a sleeve, you need to do a cuff. So that way you can keep yourself organized and it's a little less overwhelming because you're only focusing on one aspect at a time. Because I've already discussed on how to do a simple front and back in our simple tops video, I'm not going to go over the same thing in this video or how to lay everything out. Wherever you have a seam, just go ahead, put a pin and pin it down. So you can see my side seam, my bottom, my armhole, the shoulder seam, and the neckline here. Now what I wanted to point out in this one is the element of adding the zipper. So I have a separating zipper going down the back of my tank top in this example. So before, I would create one pattern piece that could be placed in the fold for my back pattern, but because I have this zipper now, it's adding an extra element. So if you were creating a pattern for a simple top back pattern, you can just do half, you can put it on a fold, that way you get one piece that's symmetrical. This one, you only have to do half, but you have to make sure that you cut out 2 pattern pieces, because I have one on this side and one on this side. And you're also going to have to remember to add seam allowance to this side of your pattern piece, because we want to make sure there's seam allowance to add the separating zipper. And it would be the same case if this was an extra strip with buttons and buttonhole. So you would do this piece, add a seam allowance here, and seam allowance all the way around actually. So after everything is pinned down and I know exactly what I'm doing, I can use my tracing wheel, do the outline. Remember, with your outline, there's no seam allowance, so you have to go back and you have to add the seam allowance and just carefully outline the whole thing. Or if you don't have a tracing wheel, go ahead, use a straight pin that I have here, and you can just punch through. That's why I have the cardboard underneath, because it makes it a lot easier for me to actually go through and poke holes into my paper, and that's going to be my guideline. Now for the zipper portion, it's basically a straight line. So even if I lay it and it doesn't lie perfectly straight, what I could do is, I'm just going to use my straight pin because it goes through the fabric into my paper instead of the tracing wheel, which might not make it through. I can go ahead, mark the top of where the top of my shirt is. I can do a hole here, maybe do a couple of holes in the middle, and then mark the bottom and do a hole. So I would do the rest of it, and then I would just do these few holes here. Then when I remove my shirt, go ahead, grab my straight ruler, and I would line up the holes and actually physically make a straight line here. Because if I go ahead and I punch holes all along the zipper, it may come out a little wavy because we're not perfect and we can't do it straight. And this way I just do a few basic holes so I know exactly where my line is, and then I use a straight ruler to make it straight and perfect. So that's how I would do it if I had a zipper that I need to fit into my shirt. Next, let's focus on the button fasteners. So here's my shirt. It has the buttonholes on one side and the buttons on the other side of the front. And you can see we have a seam right here. So this section is a separate piece from the rest of the front. So if I wanted to create this, I'm going to look at it to see exactly how it's put together. It looks like it's stitched to the front. If you look at the edge, it's a fold. So it's stitched and then it's folded over in half. And then if you look at the other side, it's a nice clean edge. So they fold it in half, they bring it over, and then they tuck over under a little bit. So then they stitch the top stitch it, and that's the one stitch you see on both sides. So it holds this back portion, and then it makes it look nice and neat on the other side as well, on the top portion. So because it's folded in half, what I'm going to do, I'm going to make this very easy for myself. Here's my pattern paper. I went ahead and created a nice straight fold, and that's why I like using pattern paper, because I can just do it really easily without having to use my ruler. The folded portion of my buttonhole section I'm going to place right on that fold. And I can also feel about how much my seam allowance is for this shirt. So it feels like the edge is about there. So I'm going to say that's about 1/4 of an inch. So that's just something I'm going to make note of. Let me just finish pinning this. And I just do it with the buttonhole side just because it's a lot easier than having to do this with the buttons in the way. But it's the same pattern, so just do what's easier. Just do the buttonhole side. And with the one pattern, you're going to cut it out of folded fabric. So you cut out 2 pieces of it and they end up opposite anyways. So you always do what's easiest. All right, so now it's pinned into place. So this is going to be the start of my pattern. I'm just going to mark this with pencil so it's a little bit easier to see. Now you don't have to worry about, because this is a folded edge, you don't have to worry about seam allowance here. You do have to worry about seam allowance up here because I have my collar attached. Where this collar is, if you have a collar, go ahead and mark it. So then when you do your real pattern, you can do a little circle or something like that. So then when you place your collar on it, you know exactly where to start it. I'm going to go ahead and grab my straight pin so then I can mark right in that seam line the edge. And then I'm going to come here down the side and mark exactly right in that seam line. Now this side where I'm marking, of course, is not including the seam allowance. So this is just a rough pattern. I would then have to add another 1/4 of an inch seam allowance here. And don't forget to add the hem allowance at the bottom if your button ends up going all the way to the bottom of the shirt. All right, so let's just say, okay, I did my whole thing. Before you remove it, we have to mark the buttonholes. So again, I'm going to grab my pencil. It's really a good idea to have a very, very sharp pencil when you do this. I don't have one at the moment. I'm just going to stick my pencil in there, or a pen. And I'm just going to draw a line, marking my buttonhole. Let me just remove this real fast. So there's my buttonhole. Just going to do a bar at the top and a bar at the bottom. Then I can just go ahead and mark the rest of this. And there's the start. And then I have another buttonhole right here. So one of your patterns that you cut out is going to be the buttonhole, and then one's going to have the buttons, obviously, so they can fasten. So I'm just going to put a small X in the middle. So the piece I cut out of fabric that I designate for the button side, I know exactly where to place those buttons so they end up right in the middle of my buttonhole for the opposite side. Now if I go ahead and I add, let's say I add my 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm just guessing where it is. But let's say, okay, that's my seam allowance. This is my mark where my collar starts. There I have my buttonholes. I can go ahead, cut out my line, and then I unfold this, and it's going to be the perfect size for this shirt for my button section. Now, just because I've done the buttonhole section a lot, don't forget, you're going to cut 2 out of fabric. Again, cut them at the same time in folded fabric so you get them both at the same time. And then you need to cut 2 out of interfacing, because you'll notice this is a little bit stiffer than the rest of my shirt. So there's definitely interfacing in here. You need the stability for when you're doing your buttonholes. So that's very important just to remember that. Next, I'm going to show you how to do a very simple triangle dart, such as a bust dart. So you can see mine is here on the top of my tank top. This is an armhole, and this is the side seam here, and here's my dart. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to look at the inside of my shirt, because then I can see exactly how wide my dart is for when it's created. I'm going to go ahead and pin it into place and smooth it out as much as possible. And I'm going to start doing my outline as normal. So here's the bottom of my armhole right here. I'm just going to use a pencil instead of my tracing wheel, so it's a little bit easier for you to see. I'll just do a dashed line here. And you're not tracing around the whole thing. I just like to do it the armhole, and then I'm going to do a little bit of the side seam. And go ahead and go past the dart, just a little bit past the dart. All right, so where the folded edge of the dart is, one side is stitched and one side is folded. So my dart is being pressed down. So this is the folded side. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to grab my sewing gauge for this one, and I'm going to draw out a line. Let me just straighten this out. And I actually have a straight pin right at the end of my dart. So I made sure to punch it through so I know exactly where the end is. I'm going to draw a line like that. So that's the center of my dart. Then I'm going to measure the widest point of my dart here. So from the folded edge to where the stitch is. And I already did this about 7/8 of an inch. So then on each side, let me move this pen, on each side of my dart, I'm going to go ahead and draw a line, 7/8 of an inch. And I'm going to do the same thing on this side. Let me just do this so I can actually see where it is. And then I'm going to draw another line going out, like that. So then I make sure that I do this point right here. Let me go ahead and remove my pins, so I can actually see the end. There it is right here. So just like you see with patterns, how they do a little bar at the end, then I'm going to connect. Actually get my other ruler so I don't have that in the way. Connect the end. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. So you're connecting at the base where the side seam is, not up here. Just where the line is right here. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. Okay. Now you can't just continue on doing the side seam, because what you'll find is when you start putting your thing together, as soon as you pinch this fabric together, the front of your bodice is going to end up shorter than your back. So we want to make sure that's not going to happen. So at this point, I'm just going to remove my shirt. And you're going to kind of pretend to create a dart out of your paper. So it's a little bit difficult because it's not as flexible as your fabric. The middle one, you're going to fold right on that middle line with your paper. And then you're going to bring these two lines together and sort of take the folded line and fold it down just like it is in your shirt. You're basically replicating that. So I'm going to go ahead and start doing that. I'm going to do it off camera because it's a little hard for me to do it from this angle, and then I'll show you what it looks like when I'm done. Here's my dart again. I went ahead and did a pen, so it'd be a little bit easier to see. I just didn't do a pen going on the side seam here because it's going to change because we're going to shape the dart. But here it's okay if I go ahead and do a pen. So again, I've already folded this, so it's a lot easier now for me to do. Folded this together. The folded side of my dart gets pressed down in the same direction as it is in my shirt because you want everything to be exactly the same. And because it's paper, it doesn't cooperate as much as fabric. You just got to smooth it out as best you can. And I'm just going to use a little bit of tape to kind of hold it into place temporarily. All right, so now that that's in place, I'm going to grab my shirt again. Same side that I had before. Let's see here, it goes this way. And I'm going to line it up with my line I had done before. So this corner is going to be lined up. Go ahead, pin it back into place. And you'll see with this folded up, here's my fold line of my dart. It matches this dart exactly. So that's exactly what you want to see. If you did that and it's in the same spot and it's not down here, not up here, then you did it perfectly. Congratulations. I'm going to pin the rest of this. Once it's all straight like you want it, you can go ahead and continue doing the side seam. I'd also do the bottom hemline as well. Remember, there's no seam allowance attached to this yet. So you just got to keep that in mind. That still needs to be added. This section here, where the dart is, I'm going to draw my seam line again, either with a straight pin or with your tracing wheel. Go ahead and punch that in. You definitely want to make sure that comes through. So let's say I went ahead and I did the rest of the shirt. I'm going to remove my shirt again. I'm going to remove my tape here. Open up. And it's kind of hard to see, but now I'll show you the direction of my line. It kind of goes like this, and it goes like this. Let me remove this. Actually, let me do it in pen, so it's definitely a lot easier to see. And you'll see it won't just be a flat line, because now the dart is shaped, and we'll just pretend that here is my continuation of my side seam. Now you'll notice this is kind of pointy and sticks out, but if this is my fabric now and I go ahead and I create my dart, as long as when you create your dart and you press it down and it's one smooth line, that's what is important. That's what matters, because we want this to be a continuous side seam line. And if you don't shape it, and I just did a line here, what you'll notice is once you create your dart, your fabric's going to kind of go inward and then go outward, and it's going to look very awkward. So that's why you shape it like that. So that would be the correct way to do it. And then when I finish with this pattern, I would go ahead and add my seam allowance like normal. Lastly, let's go ahead and talk about tucks. Now, tucks seem like a complicated design, but they actually aren't. It just takes some work in order to create the pattern for it. So for this particular shirt, you can see I have a tuck design here. And what a tuck is you're taking your fabric, you're pinching it, and then you're sewing on one side. So here at the top of the tuck is a fold, and then you have stitches on the sides of the tuck. So you can either have vertical tucks or you can have horizontal tucks. Either one I've seen in both shirts. The black yarn is outlining where my seam allowance is for this particular piece. So my tucks are only in this section, and this is a separate piece that is sewn into my front. I have it on both sides. So again, I only need to create one pattern piece and just cut out two, and that'll serve for both sides of my shirts. So now that I've already done my outline, I can go ahead, use my straight pin, mark my outline into my seam line. So that's going to create this basic shape on my pattern paper, which is what I want. Before I go ahead and remove my shirt and pins, the next thing I need to do is I'm going to mark where my tucks are. You can also, if you already took off your shirt, you can use a sewing gauge or a ruler and then you can just measure and then mark it on your paper. Where I'm marking it is where the stitch line is for the tuck. So here's the stitch line. So I'm going to mark right here. I'm going to do it at the top and then I'm going to do it at the bottom. Most of these are pretty easy because it looks like it's going to be a straight line from top to bottom. And this one right here is a little bit on the curvy side. So we're going to keep it simple. We're going to do the straight ones. And I'm going to do it for all tucks that I have. And I'm just using push pins to kind of mark the spot. And then as I'm slowly removing it, only remove one section at a time. So I'm keeping the straight pin here, marking my tuck. I'm going to go ahead and remove this pin. Carefully lift it up. And then just use a pencil or a pin to kind of, let me just pull this up so you can see my pin right here. Just mark it. So that way you don't get confused with all the holes in your paper. So then I'm going to remove that pin and I'm going to do this one over here. Just mark it. That way it'll be easier once I remove the whole thing. Another thing that you want to do is you want to measure the width of each of your tucks. These are all the same size, so that makes it easy. So if I just measure one side from the stitch line to the folded edge, it's 1/4 inch, but remember this is folded in half because there's a fold in top. So I'm going to go ahead and double that. So I'm going to remember 1/2 inch for when we start including our tucks in our pattern. So I'm going to go ahead, finish creating just the outline of the pattern and marking my tucks, and then I'll show you what to do next. Here I have the outline of my pattern piece that I'm creating, and I went ahead with a pen and drew where my tuck lines were going to be. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to put another sheet of paper underneath and make sure it's bigger than your piece because you're going to be spreading out and you want to make sure that you're covered. And on one edge, the edge I'm going to start with, I'm going to go ahead, tape that down into place. I'm just using a little bit of tape here. And right on my tuck line, let me remove these pens so it's easier. I'm going to go ahead and cut right on this line, because now we're going to be inserting those tucks. This for me is the easiest way to do it because then you don't have to do any weird math calculations. Okay, so now I have two different pieces. I'm going to go ahead and grab my sewing gauge and just very quickly I'm just going to draw a line 1/2 inch from the line that I just cut for my first piece. So now I'm just using this as a guideline for when I've taped the other piece into place. Okay, and go ahead and use a little bit more tape to tape this other side down so it's not going to go anywhere. Okay, and then actually let's draw a line down here at the bottom so we have a reference. Make sure we do it on straight. Okay, so the bottom edge of this is now going to meet my bottom line. And I'm going to take this edge and meet it with my 1/2 inch marks I just created. Pin that into place so it doesn't move anywhere. And then I can go ahead and tape this side into place. I'm going to grab my pin and darken this side. All right, so this is one tuck that I just added. So when I bring these together, you always want to go in the same direction. Either they're all going this way or they're all going that way. You just got to pick a direction. I'm going to all go this way. So now I'm creating the draft of my pattern. So I know, okay, here's a tuck from this line to this line. The arrow is showing me which way that I need to pinch. And then I'm going to, when I iron it, after I stitch it, I'm going to press it in this direction. So there's one done. So now I'm going to do the exact same thing on this line here. Cut along the tuck line. Okay. Go ahead and tape this down a little bit so it doesn't go anywhere. So of course this pattern piece, when you're done with it and after you add the seam allowance and stuff, it's going to end up bigger than what your shirt currently is. But after you create all your tucks and you sew them in, they end up being the same size. We just got to take into account for this tucks. Okay, so here again, 1/2 inch. Bring this in, matching up this bottom line here so I know it's straight, and matching up the side with my 1/2 inch marks. That looks pretty good. Pin it into place to hold it. And then I'll put some tape down, just so it doesn't go anywhere. Okay, I'm going to grab my marker, darken the lines here, so I know exactly where the next set of tucks are going to be. And obviously you can use a ruler to make this as neat as you can make it. I'm just trying to give you an idea. All right, so there's my next one. This line goes to this line. This line goes to this line. And then I'd go ahead and do the same thing over on this side. Just like with the dart, we need to make sure we shape the area that the tuck is in, so we don't just draw a straight line from here to here. So you're going to pretend like you're creating a tuck. Right in the middle of the tuck, you're going to pinch it, so the middle part is right on that fold. Bring the two sides together. You're going to fold it in the direction that it would be in your shirt. Okay, so here's one side, here's the other side from the pattern that I originally drafted. I'm just going to draw a line to use as a guideline between the two. So it's one smooth curve going from here to here. You can either use your straight pins or use your tracing wheel. You're going to poke through the paper, so you're poking through both sides of your fold. You're going to unfold it, and you're going to see this design. Let me just do it with a pin so you can see exactly what it looks like. So it comes down, and then it comes up to this point here. So this is the edge of the other one. Just outline that for you. It goes like this, and this would be the top edge of that. So that's going to be the top edge of what your pattern is going to look like. Once you have this outline done, you can go ahead and add seam allowance all the way around. And then you would just do the same thing for these other tucks that you did for this first one. So once all your tucks are done and it all looks like this, you can go ahead, add your seam allowance, and you're good to go. I went ahead and cut it out so you can see the outline of the top with the shaping of the tucks. So it's definitely not one smooth curve once it's all unfolded like this. But if I was to fold all my tucks up, let's see if I could do this with one hand. You can see here now the top edge is one smooth curve, and this is what you want it to look like after you finish sewing all these tucks into place. So it doesn't matter what it looks like at the beginning, as long as when you finish stitching it, it looks correct. Now also, if you don't want it to have all these tape pieces and you want it to look neater, you can lay another piece of paper or tracing paper over this, and you can go ahead, do an outline, and then add your seam allowance where you need to add it. So that way you'll end up with a finished piece that looks a lot nicer, and you can go ahead and write your information in it. Just don't forget to draw your tuck lines and your directions. Make sure to check out our other videos and visit ProfessorPincushion.com to view our complete library with well over 150 sewing video tutorials. New tutorials are released regularly, so make sure to subscribe to be notified of the next release. Thanks for watching!